My girlfriend left me after finding 37 photos that proved I wasn't human. The soft glow of the bistro lights cast a warm, honeyed hue over our table, glinting off the polished silverware and the rim of Olivia's wine glass. We were at a new, ridiculously expensive French restaurant, the kind of place with velvet chairs and waiters who move with a silent, predatory grace. It was our 3-year anniversary, a milestone that felt both monumental and perfectly natural. Olivia was laughing, her head thrown back, the sound of bright, musical melody that cut through the low hum of the restaurant. In that moment, she was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, the center of my universe, the anchor of my world. I was about to say something cheesy and heartfelt about how lucky I was when the waitress appeared at our table. She was nondescript, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that seemed to look through you rather than at you. She hadn't been our server all evening. She seemed to materialize out of nowhere. She leaned over, ostensibly to clear an empty bread plate, and whispered something in Olivia's ear. It was a single, brief sentence, so quiet I couldn't catch a single word. But I saw the effect it had on Olivia. It was as if a switch had been flipped, plunging her from radiant joy into a state of cold, stark horror. Her laughter died in her throat, her smile frozen and then collapsing into an expression of pure, unadulterated shock, the look of someone who has just witnessed a fatal car crash. The waitress straightened up, her face a mask of blank indifference, and walked away without another word, disappearing back into the choreographed chaos of the restaurant. Olivia wouldn't look at me. Her gaze was fixed on her half-eaten plate of coco vin, but she wasn't seeing it. Her eyes were distant, unfocused, as if she was staring into an abyss that had suddenly opened up at her feet. "Olivia? Honey, what's wrong?" I asked, my own heart beginning to beat a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs. "What did she say to you?" She just shook her head, a small, almost imperceptible movement, and remained silent. I asked again, my voice rising with a confusion that was rapidly curdling into fear. She didn't answer. She just stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the polished floor, and walked out of the restaurant without a backward glance. I was left sitting there, stunned, the remnants of our celebratory dinner turning to ash in my mouth. By the time I had frantically flagged down our original waiter, paid the exorbitant bill, and rushed outside, she was already in her car, the engine running. I ran to the driver's side and knocked on the window, my face a mess of confusion and desperation. She looked at me then, her eyes, which just minutes before had been shining with love, were now filled with a strange, terrifying mixture of pity and disgust. She mouthed 2 words through the glass, "It's over." And then she drove away, leaving me standing alone on the curb, the taillights of her car a pair of retreating red eyes disappearing into the darkness. I stumbled back inside, my mind a roaring chaos, and demanded to speak to the waitress who had been at our table. The manager, a slick man with a practiced, placating smile, informed me that the woman I was describing had clocked out for the night just moments after serving our table. When I pressed for her name, for her contact information, his smile tightened, and he politely but firmly asked me to leave before he was forced to call security. That night, Olivia blocked my number. The next morning, when I showed up at her apartment, a desperate, sleep-deprived mess, her roommate answered the door. She looked at me with an expression of such pure, unadulterated revulsion that I took a step back. "You need to leave," she said, her voice a low, dangerous growl. "Now, or I'm calling the police." The door slammed in my face, leaving me standing in the hallway, the invisible brand of some unforgivable sin seared into my skin. My world had been detonated by a single, whispered sentence, and I had absolutely no idea what it was. My mind, in its desperate search for a logical explanation, immediately went to the most obvious, if unlikely, conclusion. The waitress was a ghost from my past, an ex-girlfriend with a vendetta, but the theory fell apart under the barest scrutiny. I had only had 2 serious relationships before Olivia, both of which had ended amicably. And more importantly, I had never seen that waitress before in my life. I was sure of it. I tracked down both of my exes, enduring 2 incredibly awkward and slightly accusatory phone calls, and asked if they knew anyone who worked at that restaurant. Both of them, with varying degrees of suspicion in their voices, said they had no idea what I was talking about. My next theory was that the waitress had mistaken me for someone else, that she had whispered a false accusation of infidelity into Olivia's ear. It was a plausible, if frustrating, scenario. I spent the next 3 days staking out the restaurant, hoping to catch her coming or going from shift. On the 3rd day, the manager, his patience clearly worn thin, finally took pity on me. He told me that the waitress had quit without notice the day after our dinner. She hadn't even come back to pick up her last paycheck. She had simply vanished, leaving behind nothing but a cryptic forwarding address that turned out to be a vacant lot. The mystery deepened, spiraling into a vortex of paranoia and self-doubt. What if it wasn't about another woman? What if the waitress knew something about me? Something I didn't even know myself? A dark family secret, perhaps? I called my mother, my voice tight with an anxiety I couldn't conceal, and asked her if our family had any hidden scandals, any skeletons in the closet that could warrant such an extreme reaction. She just laughed, a warm, genuine sound that was a stark contrast to the cold dread that had taken up residence in my chest. "Honey," she said, "I wish we were that interesting. Our family is disappointingly, almost painfully normal." Desperate and running out of options, I did something I never thought I would do. I hired a private investigator, a grizzled ex-cop named Frank who seemed to have stepped straight out of noir film. I even floated the insane theory that maybe I'd been drugged at the restaurant, that I had done something terrible that I couldn't remember. Frank, to his credit, listened to my rambling, paranoid story with a professional, non-judgmental patience. His first report, delivered a week later, was both illuminating and deeply unsettling. The waitress, whose real name was apparently as fluid as her employment history, had worked at 6 different restaurants in the past 2 years, quitting each one abruptly and without notice. At one establishment, a steakhouse downtown, she had been fired for telling a female customer that her husband was cheating on her with a woman at another table. When the distraught wife called her husband, he was at home, watching the game. The accusation was entirely false, but the seed of doubt had been planted. The couple, Frank told me, divorced 6 months later. The investigator, a bloodhound on a cold trail, finally tracked her to a greasy, 24-hour truck stop diner 4 states away. He approached her during her shift, showing her a photograph of me. She looked at it, and a flicker of recognition crossed her face. "Oh, him," she said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. She wouldn't say where she knew me from, but she did offer one cryptic clue. She told Frank that she had only whispered a single sentence to Olivia, and it was something anyone could have noticed if they had just been paying attention. When he pressed her, asking what she had noticed, her response was another maddening riddle. "It wasn't about what I saw," she said, wiping down the counter with a dirty rag. "It was about what was missing." The next day, when Frank went back to the diner to question her further, she was gone. She had quit in the middle of her shift and disappeared again. Her only remaining coworker, a tired-looking woman with a cigarette dangling from her lips, told Frank that the waitress had left right after serving breakfast to a young couple. She had whispered something to the woman, who had immediately burst into tears. The couple had fled the diner, leaving their uneaten food on the table. As they left, the coworker had heard the distraught woman repeating the same phrase over and over again, 37 times. 37 times. It was another meaningless piece in a puzzle that was becoming more and more insane. 3 months passed, a long, agonizing season of silence and unanswered questions. I was a ghost in my own life, going through the motions of work and daily existence. But my mind was a relentless detective, constantly replaying that night, constantly searching for a clue I had missed. And then, one mundane Tuesday afternoon, I saw her. I was in the cereal aisle of the grocery store, staring blankly at a wall of brightly colored boxes, when I heard it. Her laugh. That bright, musical sound that I had thought I would never hear again. I abandoned my cart, a half-empty box of Cheerios toppling onto the floor, and ran around the corner of the aisle. And there she was. She was standing by the dairy case with her sister, looking completely, painfully normal. When she saw me, the color drained from her face. She grabbed her sister's arm, her eyes wide with a familiar, panicked fear. I was already moving toward them, my own voice a desperate, pleading sound that I barely recognized as my own. "Olivia, please," I begged. Just tell me. Just tell me what she said." Her sister, a fiercely protective older sibling, stepped between us, a human shield. But Olivia, to my surprise, put a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay," she said, her voice a fragile whisper. She looked at me then, for the first time in 3 long months, and her eyes were glistening with unshed tears. "I need you to answer one question," she said, her voice trembling. "And I need you to be honest. If you can answer it, if you can explain it, I'll know the waitress was wrong. We can forget this whole thing ever happened." "Anything," I said, my own voice hoarse with a desperate, pathetic hope. "I'll answer anything." She pulled out her phone and navigated to her photo gallery. She showed me a picture. It was a photo of me from our second date, a beach trip we had taken 3 years ago. But a part of the image was circled with a crude, red digital marker. She zoomed in on the circle. "I need you to explain this," she said, her voice now a cold, flat demand. I looked closer, my eyes struggling to focus on the small, glowing screen. And then I saw it, and the blood in my veins turned to ice. Because in that moment, I finally, horrifyingly, understood. The photograph was a typical, sun-drenched beach scene. It showed me, younger and happier, standing on the sand with Olivia and 2 other couples we had befriended that day. All of us were smiling, squinting into the bright, afternoon sun, and behind each of us, Our shadows were stretched out, long and dark, on the pale, golden sand. Except for me. Behind everyone else, a clear, dark silhouette. Behind me, nothing. My shadow was completely, inexplicably, and undeniably missing. I looked up from the phone, my heart a frantic, trapped bird in my chest, and I saw Olivia watching me, her eyes searching my face for a flicker of recognition, for an explanation that I didn't have. My hands began to shake, a violent, uncontrollable tremor that made the phone in my hand vibrate. The fluorescent lights of the grocery store seemed to hum and intensify, the brightly colored boxes of cereal on the shelves blurring into a nauseating kaleidoscope. Olivia's sister took a hesitant step backward, her own face a mask of fear and confusion. More shoppers were starting to notice our strange, silent drama, their carts slowing, their gazes lingering with a morbid curiosity. I tried to speak, to form a word, any word, but my mouth was as dry as the sand in the photograph. When I finally managed to open it, the only sound that came out was a weird, pathetic, croaking noise. My throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. I don't understand. I finally managed to whisper, the words feeling foreign and clumsy in my mouth. Olivia's expression softened, the hard edge of her anger giving way to something else, something that looked almost like pity. She swiped to another photo. This one, according to the timestamp, was from the same day, about an hour earlier. In this one, my shadow was there, a normal, unremarkable silhouette stretching out behind me, just like everyone else's. She held the phone up, swiping back and forth between the two images, a brutal, digital flipbook of my impossible affliction. One moment, I was whole. The next, a fundamental part of me was gone. My legs turned to jelly, and I had to grab onto the metal shelving to keep myself from collapsing, sending a cascade of Cheerios boxes crashing to the floor. The sound was loud in the suddenly quiet aisle. "Do you know why?" Olivia asked, her voice shaking but insistent. "Do you know why your shadow disappeared between these two pictures?" "No," I said, the word a raw, honest admission of my own terrifying ignorance. "I have no idea. I don't know how that's even possible." Her sister, now looking thoroughly spooked, suggested we take this conversation somewhere more private. People were starting to pull out their phones, their faces a mixture of curiosity and concern. Olivia nodded, and we agreed to meet at a coffee shop 2 blocks away. I watched them hurry toward the exit, and then I was alone in the cereal aisle, a grown man clinging to a shelf of breakfast food for support, my entire understanding of reality having just been systematically dismantled by a series of 3-year-old vacation photos. In the coffee shop, the full extent of her secret investigation was laid bare. She spread the photos across the table, a gallery of our shared life, our happy memories, now tainted by this bizarre, creeping horror. Birthday parties, date nights, hiking trips, random selfies. And in a significant, terrifying number of them, my shadow was missing. There was no pattern, no discernible logic. Different times of day, different seasons, indoor, outdoor, it made no difference. My shadow seemed to come and go as it pleased, a fickle, unreliable companion. She told me then what the waitress had whispered. A single cryptic sentence. "Look at what's missing from him, not what's there." It wasn't until Olivia got home that night, her mind still reeling, that she had stumbled upon the first clue. A photo she had posted to Instagram just before dessert had arrived, a happy, smiling selfie of the two of us at the restaurant table. In it, my shadow, which should have been cast on the wall behind me, was gone. And once she saw it, she couldn't unsee it. She had spent the rest of that night, and the 3 months that followed, obsessively combing through every photograph she had ever taken of me. She found 37 in total where my shadow was absent. 37. The number the waitress at the truck stop had repeated. She had become a reluctant paranormal investigator, her love for me battling with a growing, undeniable terror. As she was speaking, my own gaze drifted to the wall behind our table. The afternoon sun was streaming through the coffee shop window, casting long, clear shadows of the other patrons. I could see Olivia's shadow and her sister's. But where mine should have been, there was only a blank, empty space. Olivia followed my gaze, and when she saw it, when she saw the live, real-time evidence of my affliction, she finally broke down, her sobs a raw, heartbreaking sound of a love that was being crushed under the weight of an impossible reality. "I can't," she cried, her words muffled by her hands. "I can't be with someone when I don't even know if they're fully human." I reached for her hand, a desperate, instinctual gesture of comfort, but she recoiled, pulling her hand away as if my touch might burn her. And in that moment of rejection, a long-dormant, half-forgotten memory flickered to life in the dark recesses of my mind. I was 7 years old, a family camping trip in a sprawling, dense state park. I had wandered off, chasing a butterfly, and had gotten hopelessly, terrifyingly lost. I was missing for 6 hours. A park ranger eventually found me, sitting by a creek, unharmed but strangely quiet, just staring into the water. I had no memory of those 6 hours. Not a single, solitary image. It was a complete and total blank. I told them about the camping trip, about the missing hours. Olivia's sister, who had been silently scrolling through her phone, her face a mask of morbid fascination, looked up. "What if that's when it started?" she asked. The idea, as insane as it sounded, was a lifeline in my sea of confusion. It was a starting point, a potential origin for my impossible condition. I drove back to my hometown that weekend, back to the state park where a piece of my life had been inexplicably stolen from me. I followed the old hiking trail, my heart pounding with a mixture of dread and a strange, almost hopeful anticipation. A faint, almost imperceptible pull led me off the main path, down a narrow, overgrown deer trail. And there, in a secluded, sun-dappled clearing, I found it. A massive, ancient oak tree, its bark covered in a series of strange, weathered symbols that seemed to vibrate with a strange energy, symbols that felt, on some deep, primal level, terrifyingly familiar. I took out my phone to photograph them, and that's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. On the screen of my phone, my shadow was there, a perfect, normal silhouette on the ground. But when I looked down with my own eyes, there was nothing. The paradox was so jarring, so fundamentally reality-bending, that I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. At the local library, an old, leather-bound journal from the 1800s provided the next piece of the puzzle. The symbols from the tree matched a series of drawings in the journal, illustrations for a local Native American legend about shadow walkers, people who had been touched by the spirit world and had come back, incomplete. They were said to exist in two worlds at once, never fully belonging to either, their shadows a visible manifestation of their fractured state. The journal spoke of seers, people who could perceive this condition, who felt a compulsive need to reveal the truth, to protect the whole from the incomplete. The waitress. The description of a seer from the journal was a perfect match, right down to her dark, severe bun and her unsettling, soul-piercing gaze. The journal led me to a local folklorist, a man named Silas, whose grandmother had been a collector of these stories. He performed a simple test with a candle and a mirror in a darkened room. In the mirror, as I held the flickering flame, my reflection wavered, flickering in and out of existence like a bad television signal. Silas, his face pale with a genuine, superstitious terror, told me his grandmother believed that shadow walkers, without meaning to, could drain the life force from those they were close to. And in that moment, every failed relationship I had ever had, every partner who had eventually left, complaining of a strange, inexplicable exhaustion, suddenly made a horrifying kind of sense. The final piece of the puzzle was a single, devastating sentence in Silas's grandmother's journal. It described how shadow walkers could never form a complete, lasting bond with another person, because a part of them was always, irrevocably, somewhere else. The connection, she wrote, would always feel empty, like hugging someone through a thick blanket. I met with Olivia one last time, with a therapist, a kind, understanding man named Xander, present as a mediator. I laid it all out for her: the camping trip, the tree, the journal, the legend of the shadow walkers. Xander, rather than dismissing it as a delusion, reframed it in the language of modern psychology. Whether it was a literal spirit world or a profound, unremembered childhood trauma, he explained, the result was the same: a form of dissociation, a protective mechanism that had left me feeling perpetually, fundamentally disconnected from my own life. Olivia listened, her eyes filled with a deep, heartbreaking sadness. "I still love you," she said, her voice a fragile whisper. "But I can't do this. Since we've been apart, I feel like myself again. I have more energy. I'm not so tired all the time." The journal was right. I had been draining her, a psychic vampire who wasn't even aware of his own hunger. We said goodbye that day, a quiet, tearful end to a love that was a casualty of something neither of us could understand or fight. In the months that followed, I threw myself into therapy with Xander. We worked on grounding techniques, on meditation, on exercises designed to pull me back into my own body, to make me feel present in my own life. I joined a support group, a small circle of people who, for various reasons, all felt a similar sense of disconnection from the world. We didn't talk about spirits or curses. We talked about trauma, about dissociation, about the shared, lonely experience of watching your own life from a distance. I saw Olivia once more, about 6 months later, at a crowded farmer's market. She was with someone new, a tall, handsome man with a warm, easy smile. She looked happy, vibrant, her light no longer being dimmed by my unintentional shadow. Our eyes met across the bustling crowd, and she gave me a small, sad, but not unkind, nod of acknowledgement. And in that moment, I felt a strange, unexpected sense of peace. The waitress, the seer, had not been cruel. She had been an agent of a painful, but necessary mercy. She had saved Olivia from a life of being loved by a ghost. My shadow still comes and goes, but I am no longer a mystery to myself. I have started a blog, a quiet corner of the internet where I share my story, my research, my journey of learning to live with one foot in another world. And I have found a community of others like me, other shadow walkers, all of us navigating the strange, liminal space between worlds, all of us learning, one day at a time, how to be as whole as we can be.